She's having a bachelorette riding. She rides.
Bill has done a good job of finding.
Don't let anybody next to you drive. You picked the right guy. I'm going to show you one more photo. I had to hide behind this one.
Yeah. Jack, Momo loves
If I get him here, he's going to find that. Maybe he can share that.
Oh, yeah. They have a great So he wanted time off to be able to go and see his grandchild. Let's go back out.
We moving forward about 4 months. Good. That's fine.
We're coming into your knees.
The other side of the track.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. I'm Dave Weber, and I'm Commodore for this 2025 season for the Marblehead Yacht Club, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the last of our winter programs in this series. Certainly not the least, one I'm really excited about. Many of you might have been here for our first one, which also focused very much on the America's Cup. Kelly and J.B. Braun were here freshly back from having worked at the most recent America's Cup, and they shared a deep dive into the new technologies and a lot of their experiences, not only from that cup, but over the years from some of the travels that they had, and it was a great kickoff to the season. Today we're going back to another era in the America's Cup, and one of my favorites. There's nothing like a 12 meter, right? I mean, it's incredible. When we first moved to Massachusetts, we were living in Cambridge, and we decided to sail out of Newport. We had spent some time down there. I was in grad school during the, heaven forbid, 1983 time frame when the Americans lost the cup to the Aussies, but enjoyed Newport a lot. And it was worth the 2-hour drive down there. There would be J-boats around and 12 meters everywhere. A lot of the oldies were there, and many are moored there regularly, but depending on what race was going on, you know, people would be in town, and you could see a dozen 12 meters, and really representing the best years of the cup in many ways. And Valiant is certainly that. It's a historical vessel. As most of you know, the last wooden 12 meter built to compete for the cup. And we're going to hear more about that. I don't want to take a lot of time away from Gary, but we're just delighted to have him here, and along with Andrea and Elliot in the back, and lots of friends, obviously, just talking about more than 3 decades of being owner, skipper, caretaker, steward. I mean, really, it's a labor of love to own a boat like this, and maintain it, share it with the world, sail it on both sides of the ocean, and just keeping it running, working with the original designer, which I hope we hear more about. And besides all of that and all of Valiant, certainly Gary's been involved, Gary and Andrea, in a lot of different aspects of making this town better. Most certainly for those of us here at the NYC, Gary's been chair of the Harbors and Waters Board for quite a number of years, a small but very influential committee in terms of watching out for boaters' interests, commercial fishermen, and really allowing all of us the access to the water in such a beautiful area as Marblehead Harbor. So thank you for that service as well, and I hope that everyone will join me in welcoming Gary Gregory.
I've only got about 400 slides, so we should be able to get through this in a few hours. I just have a question to get started, and I asked earlier, and I was a little bit surprised at the answer. How many people here remember Cabby 1, Cabby 2, Odie Millmore, Odie's Navy? Okay. How many people remember the transportation company and the ice house and the ice girls? Okay. So that's my view of Marblehead, okay, is that era. And I've been sailing for 50 years, but I didn't even see a sailboat until I got to college. So which is kind of interesting. So my view of sailing was, I grew up in Alaska in an Air Force base next to a fishing village. And I started high school in the Tlingit village of Naknek, Alaska. For those of you that watched Deadliest Catch, That's where the season starts, and you see the boats milling around waiting for the flag to drop. Wasn't like that back in the 60s. There was no NOAA. You went out when you wanted to go out and the weather was nice, not when they said it was time to go out. So I did fishing, and not sport fishing, fish killing. We're basically harvesting fish for a living. And when I went to college, eventually one of my fraternity roommates said, "Have you ever gone sailing?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, my father shipped a boat over for me, and it was a Chinese junk." I don't know if you remember the Chinese junk in Swampscott. Okay, that was sent over by this Thomas Tynyak Wu's dad, who owns Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Shipped it over so that Thomas wouldn't feel homesick. So I went sailing on that boat. It was a blast. And then another guy said, "Wait a minute, would you go out sailing in a dinghy on the Charles?" I said, "I suppose so, but only on he said only on a windy day because they were looking for ballast." And that was fun. So then after college, 5 of us went together and bought a wooden boat. And if you wind your mind back to the early 70s, wooden boats were almost free because fiberglass boats were coming out, and there's a lot of maintenance and costs with a wooden boat. And if you were willing to do your own work, anybody could afford a wooden boat. So we went together and we got one, and it was a wonderful summer. We never really got to go sailing because everything was broken all the time. And it got to the end of the year and we discovered you have to take the boat out of the water. You buy a boat, it's in the water, you never think what do you do with it when it comes out. So we were looking for a place to put the boat, and we ended up in Marblehead. So if you remember back to the days of Cabby and all, you probably saw that boat rattling around with it. It's a floating bad neighborhood. And so all of your boys, everybody knows it. And so we spent more time working on this boat than we spent sailing. It was a really good summer if you got 1 day of sailing for 2 weeks of working on the boat. And as we got better and better at sailing and working on the boat, we broke fewer things and we were capable of going longer distances. So we took to going to Newport every August. Why Newport? Well, no one knew us in Newport. I don't know if you can wind back to your college days and think about it. Newport is where single women went to drink. And we liked the whole program. So we were at this place called Newport Offshore, which was active. They built boats. It's where all the 12s hung out, and race boats. So every hot race boat, your boys were there on Scarietto, boats like that. So we would go down there, and in 1979 they started it was the first wooden boat race in this area. And they walked the docks and they dragged us into it, and we had a really, really good time. For all the reasons, all the drinking, the partying, the sailing, it was just so much fun. And we started doing races, and fast forward to 1983, which Dave already mentioned. By then, every August, we had a slip at Newport Offshore. And we didn't even know what the America's Cup was. Suddenly, our private marina was full of 12 meters and Australians. So we were across the slip from Australia too. And so this is the centerfold picture of the definitive Victor's book about 1983. That's me driving the dinghy and trying to hold an Aussie from falling overboard. So that exposed me to what 12-meter racing was in its heyday. Massive crews, working on boats all night to go sailing for 4 hours. It was totally like working on a wooden boat all over again. You spend days of work to go on a 2-hour race. And it turns out I like working on boats more than I like sailing on boats, actually. So it was a match made in heaven. So we got to the point where we were just sailing and racing and working. And I don't know if you recognize some of these people, but that's Ralph Anderson from back as a youth. So this boat was owned by 5 guys who had gone to school together. And as is the case, if you watch the Lion King movie, you know, one by one, they'd get married, or they'd get transferred, get a real job, go somewhere. So it went from 5 to 4 to 3. Now we're down to 2. And when it was down to 2, I had an opportunity to go to Fremantle for the race down in Fremantle, and I was able to work on some of these boats. I got sailed too, but not race. I wasn't good enough to go racing. I didn't want to. I just wanted to play with them. And so while I was off in Fremantle, my boat partner met his fiancée. And I distinctly remember the day I got back, and I said, "Hey, Dirk, we got to get going. It's time to go down to Nantucket for racing." And this woman on the boat, who I hadn't even said hi yet, "Honey, what's this guy doing on our boat?" So I thought, uh-oh, apparently there's a disconnect about ours versus all of ours. So it ended in a partnership divorce, and about the same time, there was a regatta that Fred Atkins ran from Dion's Cup, and it was just a bunch of wooden derelict boats. So it's that whole wooden boats were romantics with no money. That's what it was back then. You literally could go to any boatyard and there'd be a bunch of abandoned wooden boats that they would happily give you if you would just pay to move it. So we liked the race and we wanted to keep it going. And I don't know if you remember, this is Laurie Willard's barge. This is an authentic 18th century French field piece that we used as the starting cannon. It was a raucous crowd, and when you finished, it behooved you to make sure you were on the pin end of the line, not the committee end, because when that thing went off, it threw a lot of sparks and pieces and parts. So we started doing the Emperor's Cup right at the time that I had the partnership divorce. And at the time it was an unhappy thing. He wanted the boat, I wanted the boat. He wanted the boat to sit on it and have, drinks and mimosas. I wanted to go sailing. So the resolution involved, he got the boat and I started chartering 12 meters out of Newport and bringing them up here to race. And it was a blast because all of the boatyard gang got to go on the boat and race. And so this is what a typical gang of people would look like on the 12. And we were really not that organized about sailing. We were just having fun. And through all of my time starting the Emperor's Cup, then we wanted to get more and more organized about wooden boat racing. So there was a classic yacht regatta circuit started. And they wanted to try to take the emotion out of it and be a little analytical. And so I was one of the people that founded all of that. We decided, all right, we can do the math. We're not idiots. Let's figure out how this should work. And to make I don't want to get into all the numbers and stuff, but there's 2 things to highlight. I couldn't figure out why 12 meters always won all the races. And it seemed like no matter what we did, they won. And so I looked at it, there's this table, and all this stuff comes from 1909. And when I went back and looked into it, there's this quote, "The factor of 0.6 was determined from extensive studies." Yes, it was. The studies were little boats are winning too often, and the Commodores are building big boats, and we want to win. So since 1909, U.S., well, at the time, International Yacht Racing Union has put a 0.6 in there to favor big boats. So that was strike 1. Strike 2 is when they had their last rating system in 1934. They used this table. And all the important thing is there's some number. And if that number is 4.99 versus 5.00, 15% better rating to be 4.99. the people designing the boats knew the table. So if you built a new boat, do you think it was 4.99 or was it 5.0? 499. So it's, for a lot of reasons, that's why the big boats always won. And we tried to make it fair, and we got into trouble with U.S. Sailing. Is there anybody here that represents U.S. Sailing? I can be honest about it. I mean, they're really protective. Like we use the rules of sailing. They're licensed. You're not allowed to use the rules of sailing unless you're a member of a recognized authority. Okay, you can't host a race without being a member of a recognized authority. They sued the America's Cup for using their rule book without paying licensing fees. Those guys just did their own rule book. So what we did is we formed the UCYC under the Crane Yacht Club, which, if you know the white crane over by Front Street Boatyard, underneath it is the mailing address for the UCYC. So we went toe-to-toe with U.S. Sailing, and we had a lot of fun. For quite a while, Marblehead was basically the epicenter of organized wooden boat sailing, or racing, because I think we had a fairly fair regatta. People had a chance of winning. A lot of the boats would be headed up to Maine in the summer and coming back, so we caught them on their way back down towards the other races. So we did that for a long time, and then I found out you can't organize a race and compete at the same time. It just doesn't work because it takes too much time. Each side of that takes too much time, and it creates an appearance of a conflict. So I decided I'd rather go racing than running races, and I'd been chartering these 12s, which were a lot of fun, but it's expensive. And I thought, I've got to buy one. So this is the boat I bought, and this is Valiant when it was launched. You can see that there's nothing really on the deck. You see that opening behind the mast? That's how they raced it. The crew was down below, and the winches were down below, and they outlawed that. So this is 1970. They outlawed that in 77 because one of the French boats that copied it almost sank. Because, you know, if the waves can kind of roll over the deck, they're going to just right on down. So this is what it looked like in 1970. And an interesting anecdote, Bob Potter's father was the backup chaplain for the New York Yacht Club that blessed this boat when it was launched. So he's given me a video of the christening ceremony. It's kind of funny. This is what the boat looked like making the turn into Beacon Street. And then you could see the rudder wasn't exactly in good shape. So this is the boat going down Cradle Skid Lane. And what it looked like inside, so that's where the engine mounts were. And this is just a bunch of stuff. To me, the most exciting part was the Coleman lantern hanging. That was the lighting in it. I had that lantern for a long time, and then I accidentally broke it. But so this is what the boat looked like. So the good news is that dirt cheap. Bad news, had to ship it from California overland. And then it took, you know, a lot of work to produce a boat that you could go racing in, especially safely. So this is what it kind of ended up like in the interior. And the interior was built by Bill Tippin. Do you know Tippin Guitars? So here he is, one of the leading luthiers, which is what a guitar stringed instrument maker is. And this is before he started that business. And he's like, I'm a really good carpenter, I need some work. So we paid him to build the interior of Valiant because, like the other pictures show, it was just an empty tube with a bunch of stuff nailed down, and we got it. So the boat arrived here late in '88. And this is the first launch of the boat in 1990. And there's a couple of things. You can see that the color of the mast is different at the top. So the top of the mast is titanium, and it was built by Northrop Grumman for a cost of a little over $1 million back in 1970. And I have both of them. I have both of the masts. I've got spares. And it turns out that the rule that U.S. Sailing, my friends, felt that that's an unfair advantage. So they said, you need to get a new mast. I said, so let me get this straight. I have 2 masts in a boat, and you want me to go buy 2 brand new masts because it's cheaper. They said, yeah, it doesn't sound right, does it? I said, no, it does not. So I reached out to Olin Stephens to ask for help with it, and he wrote a letter to them saying that it really didn't change the performance that much. The reason they use titanium is aluminum, when you bend it, work hardens. So for those of you that mess with sailboat masts, a new one, you pull it back, it goes. About 2 seasons later, you pull it back and it goes, just doesn't move. And it's because the crystals all line up and it work hardens. Titanium doesn't do that. So that's why they did it. So during that time, one reason I bought the 12 meters, I had convinced myself they're not going to race 12s anymore in the America's Cup. There's one buttload of free sails out there that I can get. I'll never have to buy a sail again in my life. So I was buying container loads of 12-meter stuff. And you'd open it up, sometimes it'd be a washing machine, sometimes it's someone's laundry, sometimes it's bags of sails. None of them were any good. So that picture I showed of US 55 bouncing through the waves in Fremantle, I own those sails. And they are used, very used. So the possession, our most proud possession from that container was the Bud spinnaker, which we still have today. So we use that spinnaker. So it took a good year to get the boat sailable, and then another year to get it to the point where we were safe to be on the water. So the first time Andrea went out sailing with me, was our first adventure. Was a Wednesday night race, and we were putting the main up, and the wire halyard exploded, shot up out of the mast, went over the side, hooked the prop, lots of adult language, shouting. She hopped the cabbie off the boat. But by 1991, we were ready to go to the Marblehead to Halifax race. So here we call it the Halifax race. In Canada, they call it the Marblehead race, which is kind of funny, but I guess it makes sense. A couple of things to notice here. That's our bow girl, Stephanie. And so we started with a lot of women on the boat, and it was fun. It was all young people. In this group, 3 of the people in this picture are no longer alive. And that's one of the reasons that last year was my last year racing, is that a lot of my friends that I like doing it with aren't around, and I'm physically not in good enough shape. It's an extremely athletic boat, and I'm not in good enough shape, but your brain doesn't know that. It's like what happens when you try to play pickleball. Your brain says, run over there and hit that thing. And then you get close and it says, you idiot, lunge. You'll be all right. So this is what it looked like, and you can see that we had winches kind of nailed to the deck. It doesn't look very professional, and it's because it wasn't. This was parts we could find that we bolted on the deck to make it safe enough to go racing. However, also in 1991, a really important thing happened. We did successfully do the last Wednesday night race of the season. We were able to get to the starting line, start, finish, and win the race. So we should have just stopped then, because our only successfully started race we had won. We go back to the Boston Yacht Club with our drunked up crew of 18, and what are we going to do? Have beers and burgers. And there was a lady selling cheeseburger tickets at the Boston Yacht Club. And that's so haven't changed a bit. So Andrea agreed to go out sailing with us, and after a couple of false starts, we got sailing. And I discovered not only was she willing to go on a boat full of guys, which not everyone is, She was totally waterproof. Only person in the crew that's never been seasick and has been through some of the worst deliveries and experiences. So we used to go sailing every weekend. Unlike Tamarisk, which was a delicate boat that broke all the time, 12 meters is like, it's like sailing a dump truck. You know, if you hit something, it makes a noise, but it doesn't really affect the boat. And so we got all of this time was sailing, and the work was in the winter. So it was a completely different thing. But we sailed all the time, and every week we were either going down to a race, or coming back for a race, or doing a race. And we raced all up and down the East Coast. We had a blast. And 92, we did the tall ships. And so that's Odie Milmore and Barbara Graves and Robbie and Janet when we were all younger. So we were so thrilled to be invited as a tall ship. We never thought of the boat as a big boat. And it's funny, back in, even in the late 90s, there were plenty of big boats in this harbor.
Yeah.
Now there aren't. And so it's unusual. Back then it wasn't, but we were really happy to be invited. And one of the things that we were trying to do is win this Opera House race. I had tried repeatedly in Tamarisk. I think my best was 7th. And we went down there and won back-to-back 91 and 92. I can't find any pictures in 91 because it was wet. Probably the cameras were all busted. But we do have a picture of 92. And again, you can see there's plenty of women on the boat. It's a different kind of thing. We raced all over with the mast moms. So we had probably half the boat was women, half was guys. And to make up for the fact that it's a physical boat, we had all the winch gearing changed. We had 3-part runners instead of 2-part runners, and more people. So we were having a blast with our style of racing. And these events got bigger and bigger. This is what the Edgartown Yacht Club 12-meter regatta looked like. So you can't, I mean, it's really hard to describe because this is their event of the year. And they put on a party and we're all tied up there and we're out racing. And what's funny is there's aluminum boats. We were killing them. Our group of, basically half college kids and derelicts and their girlfriends were crushing these professional crews. It was so much fun. Mainly because they didn't know how to sail, basically. And these are complicated boats. They're really, there are so many controls. It's kind of like a star, but much, much, much bigger. There's so many controls that you really do have to learn how to make them go. And we had put the time into that. And they were buying the boats, buying the crews, and expecting that they would be able to do it. So the next thing that happened is the 150th anniversary of the America's Cup. So the America's Cup started with a race around the Isle of Wight. So originally it was called the Isle of Wight race, for obvious reasons. And the way it worked is some enterprising guys in New York built what was essentially a large pilot schooner to go over and see if they could make some money racing, because these were 100 Guinea Cup races. So the prize was 100 guineas, which in today money is probably about 250,000. So it's a real prize. And the boats at that time, were much cheaper. So these guys were going over there to make money. And they won. They weren't supposed to, but they won. They may have also cheated, but that's a separate thing. It turns out the sailing instructions forgot to mention a restricted mark. People here do Wednesday night series. So you know all the marks that the red nuns going out to Newcomb's and on the backside. We all know they're restricted, and we know you shouldn't go in there. But imagine racing instructions that leave that out. So the locals honor them, the guests don't. Is that cheating? whatever.
Gary, if it's not in the sailing instructions, is it real?
Yeah, well, it depends on whether we're sailing for fun or $250,000.
Well,
So, and that kind of mentality is in the America's Cup today too. So yeah, now the lawyers write the instructions.
yeah.
So they decided that, hey, Britain hasn't had the cup in forever. The US hasn't had the cup in forever. So the two yacht clubs that started all this are feeling on the outside. And they said, we got an idea, let's have an event. And we'll recreate this original Round the Island race. We'll invite all of the America's Cup class boats, the big Belle Epic schooners that raced back then, the 12 meters, the J boats, the IACC boats, they got them all. And so everybody's coming over, and this is suddenly now they got to, okay, this is going to be important again. We're no longer racing around for beers and hot dogs. This is prestige. We got to get real. And a whole bunch of things happened that, in my opinion, kind of took the fun out of it for me. But I didn't know that at the time, but in hindsight. So first thing that happened is they had to figure out how we're going to sail all these different generations of boats fairly. Because they don't want to have a zillion classes. They don't want to have handicaps. They wanted to figure out how we're going to do this, right? This is, Valiant is the black lines. The green lines are KZ3, which is a modern 12 meter. The most important part is the modern one is 14,000 pounds lighter with an additional 6% of sail area and 5% less wetted surface area. Which boat do you think is faster? So they had to come up with how to make this fair, but now instead of wooden boat racing with a bunch of us sitting around and it's really just about wanting people to come back again, this is a one and done. And everybody involved's got designers, lawyers, they're out to win this thing. And so it's quite hard to get agreement on how to do this. And once again, I got kind of in the middle of all that, and I reached out and got Olin Stephens involved as well. It's a whole separate story about how we got involved, but I want to just take a quick second to go over. A 12-meter boat is not 39 feet 4 inches. Okay, 12 is just a result of a calculation. And the calculation is shown in this cute t-shirt, which we stole the design and made some for ours. So it's basically length plus 2 times chain girth difference plus the square root of sail area minus freeboard. Okay. Divided by that weird number, and the number should be 12. And if you look at all the units, you've got meters, meters, square root of meters, and so you do all the calculations, it comes out that it factors out all it is just a single number. It's meters. That's it. But anyway, so that's the thing. What makes it challenging is there's all these penalties. Like the boat's depth is controlled by how long it is. If you're not long enough, you can't be deep. So there's all these things that make it really hard, and the boats end up being insanely heavy and fat. And the name of the game is where do you hide the weight to not interfere with the speed. And the person that does that the best in the whole world is Olin Stephens. So he's the guy that figured out how do you resolve these different conflicts. Now the other thing that's important is when these boats were built, they had a crew limit of 11. And they did that to make mistakes because they thought it would be more interesting for the spectators if things were going wrong. In other words, a boat gets ahead, they go to set a spinnaker, it rips in half, a guy falls in the water. It adds an element of unpredictability to the race, so it was purposeful. The America's Cup boats, the IACC boats, were the same thing. They were designed to be really difficult to run, to create drama. which was expected to be good for the watchers. So we had been sailing around with 18 to 22 people to accommodate the ladies on the boat and the people that weren't sure what they were doing. Now suddenly the crew limit they wanted 11. And I went in there and I said, at the time this is all happening, so it's right around 2000, 99, 2000. So I can't, I was 50. And I said, look, we're not the 20-year-olds that these boats were built for. And I don't know about you, but I'm not doing this with 11 people. I need about 16 or 18 to even think about it. So after a lot of negotiations, it was 15 was the limit and one observer. So what happened to change everything is the girls disappeared. We could not be competitive and have the girls on the boat. So at first we thought it'd still be okay, we'd go over and have a party in England, which we did, and it was okay, but it's not the same. And quite a few people felt the same way. And I'm going to come back and I'll tell a quick story about that in a second. So we did two things. This is what Valiant looked like when it was launched, like a beach ball. You pull it through the water at low speed, it's really low resistance. And it's the first tank-tested 12 meter. And they didn't understand what is called, I think it's Freud numbers. They didn't understand how to scale the results of a tank, so the models were too small. They needed to use much larger models for valid numbers, so they convinced themselves it would be fast, when in fact it was slow. And so Olin Stephens got involved, and we changed from that shaped stern that was like a beach ball to a more conventional straight stern with a scoop. And he got involved in that. We did it, made a big improvement, that in a larger rudder. We were able to drive the boat. And he came out and sailed with us a couple of times, and he liked the boat. He said, yeah, I shouldn't have given up on it. We should have stayed with this. But so we knew we could go over there and not embarrass ourselves. But we didn't know if we'd be fast enough to be really competitive. And at the same time, all the discussions were happening over what are we going to do about age, enhanced ratings, how do we make this fair? And the conclusion was we would have to get back on our original lines. Now, since then, we had that beautiful interior that added 3,000 pounds. We had an engine, hot and cold running water, an inverter big enough to run a hair dryer, all those kind of things. And the only way to make it work was to put a new keel on the boat. So we set out doing that, and we've got Olin heavily involved and Jimmy Taylor heavily involved in doing it. And I just put this letter in there. It's kind of funny. There's two things. Olin became a really good friend of our family. And he sent this letter to Mrs. Gary Gregory, Peaches Point, Marblehead, Mass.
And that was it.
That was it. Open the mailbox, there it was. I mean, so apparently that used to work in Marblehead. That was good enough. So he was talking about how much fun he had, and it turns out when I bought the boat, I had reached out to him and said, look, I'd really like help getting this boat sorted out. And he was helpful. He got S&S to send me all the blueprints and everything. But he said, I'm retired. I'm done. I didn't realize his wife was dying of cancer at the time. And he had withdrawn. So when we saw him again, it was at Peabody Essex Museum. And someone in the crowd asked him, Olin, what is the biggest disappointment in your life? And he said, oh, the first sail on Valiant. And the whole place erupts in laughter because the entire Doyle Sailmakers group was in town for a meeting and had gone to his presentation. They're laughing and giggling. And afterwards, Robbie says, come on, Gary. And he takes me. I says, hey, Robbie. He says, hey, Olin, I want you to meet Valiant's owner. So we took the keel off. And if you look at this, it's a little hard to see. The keel's like this. Okay, it's not flat at the top. It's like this. And it's about this wide at the top. Why is that? Well, remember I said you had to have all the fat weight in a 12 meter? Well, the clever idea was if you made the center of mass the center of gravity the same as the center of effort in the boat, it would reduce the pitching moment. So they had to hide the weight. Rather than have a big wide boat, they just added lead up high into the boat. So it was a little complicated to get off because, as you can see, you can't pull all those bolts down evenly, right? Because they point like this. So this keel was built by Mars, and it's actually, the boat is slightly deeper, the keel is longer, and it is lighter, and the boat is more stable. So it's a masterpiece of engineering, and that's where Olin and Jim Taylor got involved. These back bolts drop down into a pit, and there's an 8-foot pit they dug in the ground. So those are through bolted. It was quite a project, but we got it all put back together. This is Oliver, our oldest son, supervising Ralph Anderson as they're putting the boat back together. So we got it all together, and just in time to go off to this kind of America's Cup Jubilee event. And the way we got there was fascinating. So this is the Super Servant 3. There's 2 views of it. And right off of Newport, we're motoring along, and you look, it looks just kind of like a dock. And you pull into it, and there's divers down there on the deck with welding jack stands. So you pull in, they tie everything down, and then they pump the water out, and the boat goes and... So this is the Super Servant 3, and Valiant is way up towards the front. So they took the entire US 12-meter fleet in one go.
Over there.
Yeah. So that's how we got there. And then when we get to Cowes, has anyone been to Cowes? I had never been to Cowes. It's like the mecca of European yachting. We think Newport is hot shit, right? You think that, we think Marblehead used to be the sailing capital. No. This is the sailing center at Cowes. This is the bar area. 1,500 tap stations in that bar. 15,000 people can be drinking comfortably. That's what they do. So there were 2 of these. This is the 12-meter basin 1, and that's from one side. This is the other side of 12-meter basin 1. There's another basin next door, just as big, but that had the modern boats. Said, you modern things. The classics were closer to the bar as befits our style. So this is what our crew looked like. And if you count, there's the requisite 15 plus 1. And there's Ralph Carlton. So that's another one of our crew that's no longer with us.
Yeah.
So that is also a reason why I kind of decided that I need to stop doing this, is that I don't have the same friends to do it with.
Yeah.
And it's just, enough's enough. But anyway, that's what the crew looked like. Now, this is a picture, so there was a practice race. And we get to Cowes, and the practice race was a real long race across the Solent towards Southampton, the mainland, and then back. So, blow and stink. Valiant loves that. It's the heaviest 12-meter ever built. We got our kite up. We are cooking. And we've been beat on by Robbie, don't look back. Like when you're racing, your race is in front of you, not behind you. So finally we're getting close, and I dare look around. There's nobody. We're like 20 minutes ahead of all the boats. So Beacon of Cowes took a picture and put it in their window. I mean, we were the favorite. That was like on a Thursday. They canceled the racing next day, no wind, and it never blew over 8 knots the entire rest of the trip. So here we are in light air, and I don't know if you can see, there's a lady in lingerie on that spinnaker. And I want you to remember that. We're going to come back to it. It turns out they have 3 spinnakers. Light, medium, heavy. And in this regatta, we only saw the light and the medium.
But I'm going to show you what the heavier one looks like later. But this was behind us, so you have all the classics and a couple of dopes in the modern. Because we all started at about the same time, and we've passed all the classics. And then there's people back here who haven't figured out currents. So it was a great day of racing. We get to the big event, the Round Island race. Now, I don't helm the boat. I don't drive. I don't like it. I'm no good at it. And if I'm there to race, I want to win. And I know that's not going to happen if I'm driving. I prefer the crew management, make sure the boat works, navigation, tactics, all those things I can do without screwing up. But they decide I need to drive the boat out to the starting line. And the reason is there's 16,000 boats in the spectator fleet. And they're all amazing classical boats, plus the 2,000 boats racing in this race. Also big, amazing classical boats. And they decided it would look better on the insurance paperwork if the owner was driving. So I'm driving out, and all you can see is feet and legs. Because everyone's standing up. So we get out there. This is one of the formal pictures. This is our 12-meter start. Now, the 12 meters, there were 44 12 meters racing in this particular regatta. The current's running 5 knots that way, down course. The wind is blowing 8.5 knots in your face plus the tide. So if you have to turn around, you're screwed. This guy was over early, and that's why he's way over here, is he's had to bail out, get to the shore to get out of the current, come back down. Meanwhile, we timed it so perfectly. If this is to scale, we're way over here somewhere. It was the best start of our life. It had to be the best start of our life. We were psyched. There's a lithograph that they commissioned in this race, and all the participants got one, and it names all the boats, and you can't find Valiant because they used a series of pictures and we were gone. So it was a blast. Andrea and the wives were driving around the island in taxis. Oh, look how good they're doing. Look how good they're doing. Then they go to the finish and we're not there. And it turns out, this is a thing called Gurnard Ledge.
Yeah.
So this day was the lowest tide in 120 years. They found unexploded ordnance in the English Channel. The chain ferries in Cowes ran aground, so they were using buses instead of the chain ferries. And poor old Valiant, we just passed the last boat, which was the Prada race team on Ernesto Bertorelli's boat. And he's screaming at him, "Get in there!" And they're like, "There's no water in there." And he's going, "They're in there, and they're deeper than us. You get in there." So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And the local guy we have navigating says, "We've got to jibe out." I said, "Yep." I said, "I agree. We're out of here." So we start the jibe. The pole is a dip jibe. I don't know if you know what that means. Big old spinnaker, square away. So now we're running directly into the shore. You drop the pole across, hook it back up, crank out of there. Well, the line won't stay in the pole, and the spinnaker's going to collapse. And so the helmsman instinctively squares the boat so we can fix the pole. And we felt, right. So then we get turned, and we realize we can see the water dropping. It dropped 25 feet in about an hour and a half. So at first we had no idea how sharp this ledge was. The boat was fine as it turns. It just spent about 7 hours hard aground. But at first we lowered a guy over the edge. He was going to go look at the keel, and he's like right down there, and he click unclips him. And he's so anyway, so this was our first experience at racing, really racing in the solar. And Olin came up to our house afterwards. We had the best crew house in Cowes up on the hill. And we're all sitting there drinking beers. And he told a couple of stories about things like that had happened to him and his brother. So we went on, and on the last day of racing, so we got the boat, was fine. We were able to go sailing. It had some scratches on it, and it was embarrassed mightily. I had to write a letter to the guys' yacht club, that was our local knowledge, to explain that he did say jibe, that equipment failure prevented the jibe. So we had second place locked, and I'll have to say there's nothing worse in the world than second place. I have no problem being last. When you're last, you know so much has gone wrong that you couldn't save it. When you're second place, you're racked with what thing or two things could I have done to win this race? So here we are, we've got second locked, and we're thinking, okay, the girls have been here with us, twiddling their thumbs while we go out and do the every day. So I showed up in the morning, it was a gorgeous sunny day, and I said, we're taking the girls. Screw the crew limit. So I went around to the guy who's in first place, and I said, look, I don't think, short of being disqualified, we've got second locked, you've got first locked, do you care if we break the crew limit? He says, what are you going to do? I said, we're going to bring the girls. And he says, that's a great idea. So then we go to the third place boat, all the way down to some French who are in seventh place. And they said, dude, we will, of course, protest you. I said, all right. If you're close enough to see us at the finish, put a flag up and we'll go around the pin. I said, okay. Well, at the start, the French boat hits the 8th place boat, taking them both out of competition. So it was a justice of sorts. And basically we took all the girls, except for one. Our bow guy's crew, Andrew says I can't, anyway, one got left behind because she refused to take the time to come down and see the men off. Boy, was she mad when the boat came back here with all the girls. But anyway, so we got second, and from there the boat went all over the Med. So Prada was running a race series, and I would, because the boat has such a large crew, and you register everybody because you need to have even the guests on the list to get the bracelets to go to the social events. Then they give you hats and t-shirts and bags. I kept getting all these Prada canvas bags. We got so many of it, got to the point where we're just throwing away. I had no idea what we were doing. So we were in Sardinia in 9/11, and they came out and brought us off the race course and stopped the racing to show us. They said, look, something's happening in the US, and we've been told to get all the US boats, to ashore. So then we were doing the delivery, so the girls went home. We were on our way to a race in Monte Carlo, and we broke the mast in the Straits of Bonifacio and Mistral, and so that knocked us out of the season. And it's just, there's a story here. See how that thing's welded on the mast? I don't know if you've looked at sailboats, you'll notice you never see that. You always see a bunch of screws and a kind of a saddle screw to the mast. Turns out that when you weld, it takes the heat tempering out of the aluminum, but who knows? So anyway, we welded because it was neater and broke our mast. So leaving a whole bunch of stuff out because we could do this forever, but the next thing that happened is 2007. So in between, we came back. We fixed the mast. We did all kinds of racing, won a lot of races. And over that time period, I came to the conclusion, I'm not doing any more 12-meter events. And the reason is, I'm not doing it if we can't bring the girls. It's not the same. I've won all of them, I don't need the trophy, and I'd rather have fun. So we started boycotting all the 12-meter events and focused on the wooden boat races, where no one really cared. how many people were on the boat. We had more fun as a result of it. In 2007, between the Louis Vuitton Cup, which selects the challenger for the America's Cup, and the actual America's Cup, there's a bunch of dead time. And they've got media, a village, sponsors, and some bright person said, hey, I got an idea. We'll get the old boats to come over and have their 12-meter worlds between in the dead time. That'll keep the media busy. It'll give the sponsors something to give tickets to. And so we did that. It was a blast. This time we used a roll-on, roll-off boat. It's like making a drug transaction. We're off of Newport, foggy, dark. They're telling us coordinates to go to. We pull up, and all we know is there's a part of the sky blocked out. We pull up to this rusty old dark boat and bang on the hull. Some guy up there, yeah, this Valiant, yep. Slings come down, get into the sling, they just pick the boat up, drop it on deck, and this is what it looked like. So this one, the boat didn't sink, they used cranes. And we went over to Valencia. This was the 12-meter, or the America's Cup Village. That's a parade of 12 meters. And we did a regatta there. And this time we were a little smarter about a whole bunch of things. So in Europe, they dock the funniest way. They pull in to a dock. They don't use the dock to get off on the side. They get off on the front or the back of the boat. It's called Mediterranean Moor. And our back is full of antennas and stuff. So we built this passerelle to come in forward, and everyone laughed at it, all the locals, but it worked really well. So we had that sorted out, and we had decided we were going to cruise the Med with the family, because they raced this event early. Then there was a bunch of downtime, when they all go on vacation actually, and there's no wind. And then they start racing again in September. So that was our plan. So we went over there, and we did pretty well. This is a picture of us in the...
From Maybe CBS Extra Care. It's time for your super saving weekly deal.
All right. I love super saving weekly deals. So we went racing in the 12-meter worlds. That's a picture of the boat. It ended up getting published in a bunch of magazines. And what happened? Second place again. So once again, I mean, I suppose you should be happy. It's just, no, I'd really rather not. So then after that, we went touring all around the Med in the boat. And we had our family, a whole bunch of other Marblehead families that came and went. And we went places like we had the Carltons, we had the Bronze, we had all these families would come and go, and all the kids. And it was really quite a lot of fun. It's the first time we've actually cruised in the boat. Yeah. And it was quite enjoyable. In fact, this is a picture of the Bronze and the Gregorys. And it's, and we discovered a couple of things. So, this thing is a twing at the end of the boom that we can use for pulling a jib out. So when you're on a power reach and it's too much wind for a spinnaker, but you're using a jib, you can keep the jib out of the water and get the angle right. So we have this twing. Well, it turns out you can do other stuff with it too.
4, 3, 2, 1.
That's fun.
So we would use then you grind it back up. We'd do this over and over and over, and it was really,
Fun. Yeah.
we enjoyed the cruising in the Med. So then at the end of that 2007, we ended up back in Cannes for the 12-meter worlds. And so, where again I got second place, but that's just... But there's a race from Cannes to Saint-Tropez where we won. And the difference is we had the girls with us.
You're lucky, Jim.
Because it wasn't a 12-meter event, it was run by a yacht. So So here's what the event looked like in Cannes, and it's so hard to take pictures of heavy air and convey the terror that goes with it, because it doesn't look bad, but look at the angle of heel on this boat.
Yeah.
Okay. Look at our boom in the water. That is our chicken chute, which has an honest-to-God chicken on it. That's a big chicken. That's the 1.5 ounce, bulletproof chute. That's Valiant. That's courageous. And we are in the process of going past them like the daily freight. And the reason is, this thing had just run us over. So we were suddenly at the weather mark. So for those of you that aren't racers, you kind of typically in these America's Cup courses, you go windward, then you reach, windward, leeward, windward. Okay? We were in the first windward. So we're getting ready to go off on the reach. And suddenly it starts hailing. And the wind went up to 35 knots, and we were about 100 feet away from the mark. And I said, "Hey, Robbie, can we make it?" And he goes, "Yeah." So then we're looking at it going, "Should we set a chute?" He says, "Of course we're setting a chute." So we get around the mark, set the chute. Now it's 50 knots. But it happened so quickly, the water hasn't really kicked up. But 2 dragons sank, and it was a crisis for these people. But the best part is, okay, behind us is the classic boats. And remember I told you there were 3 spinnakers?
Yeah.
And there was the lady, there's a lady that's let's just say not demure, is the light air one. Then there's lingerie, is the moderate air one. This is what the heavy air spinnaker looks like. So we got to see the heavy air spinnaker.
That's awesome.
So then this is what the boat looks like in our normal racing trim in one of these wooden boat races. This is the Opera House Cup in Nantucket in 2006, and you can see that it's pretty full of people. We'd race with 18 to 20 people, and it's a lot of fun because you can find jobs that are not that strenuous, and you can cover for people that don't necessarily have the agility or whatever to do what they want. So that was our most favorite. Then is another sailing eye candy. This is us at the Halifax 2015 start. And by then we went all carbon. So it turns out that carbon sails are actually cheaper than Dacron sails because they last so much longer. And they're just easier to deal with. They're lighter. So we should have done it earlier because us old guys were getting tired of pulling the sails up. Instead, we got an electric halyard winch. And the part that I thought was going to keep me sailing for a long time was this is number 1 and number 2 son who sailed up and back from Halifax. It was a lot of fun. And the problem with it is that we need about 15 more of them to actually make the crew. And we just couldn't assemble a big enough bunch to do it. But that's on the way back from Halifax. And I've got one more slide. I just wanted to show you. We had a party, and we invited everybody. This was, I guess, 15 years ago. We had a 20th anniversary party for the boat. And we invited everyone who had ever worked on it, sailed on it, or touched our life. And it was several hundred people. And we made up these napkins for the party. I don't know if you can read it. Can you read it, sweetie?
Yeah, exactly.
It about covers the general.
Yes, it does.
And so then that's kind of, we've enjoyed everything about the boat and everything about Marblehead. And it's kind of funny, I got asked, I was interviewed by a high school person for a project she's doing for school. And she said, "Why did you move to Marblehead?" I said, "Well, a couple of reasons. One is that, I was thinking it's time to have kids, and I was living in Boston, and that's no place for children. And the other is, when I came to Marblehead, most of my time was spent down at the lower yard. So that's the Beacon Street boat yard. And I met the people in the boat yard. I met
people like Pete Fadden, who at the time was a kid, and the Porters. And I thought, this reminded me of the Tlingit village in Alaska. Very independent, tough people taking little boats out into the big ocean. And I thought, I belong here. So I have really enjoyed every aspect of that in Marblehead. I'm just not sure it's here anymore. And so it's sort of, there's a time that everything changes. And so I don't think I'm the kind of person to go out and get a center console. That's probably not going to happen. If I'm going powerboat, it's probably going to be a used Miss Budweiser, racing. But it is time for the next chapter. That's one more slide here just to show you. This was our kids in St. Bart's, and what we would do is put them in all this gear, and we put this in a calendar and send it to Olin, and that's one of the things that kind of an event when he died and his apartment was being cleaned out. That's one of the few things he kept was that, and another thing was a trophy we won in Edgartown. So anyway, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Now, in the Eastern, everybody wanted to go to the bar, but I don't see. Yes.
Heritage. Jeff Burrows.
Yeah.
Is he still around?
He is.
And is the boat still around?
He sold the boat. There's 2 charter companies in Newport, and they're cooperate and compete for the business. So he sold Heritage to one of those companies. They've all sold out. All the people who were racing them or chartering them when I started are either passed away or they've retired.
Yeah.
So he's retired from chartering. The boat's still down in Newport chartered. He's on
Gregory Street.
Gregory Street.
Yeah.
We see him fairly frequently.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary, for reliving the last 35 years of my life. Not that I ever sailed on Valiant, but I sailed on Heritage, and so I remember hearing a lot of the stories about Europe and racing against you, and gosh, the memories.
It is. It's amazing, and we've got literally hundreds of slides and stuff. And the sad part is, before cell phones, you didn't take enough pictures.
Yeah.
So there's times that you wish you had the pictures you don't have, but whatever. So there's someone else. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. Sorry.
A question. The Nefertiti and the Easterner were built in Marblehead. Whatever
Yes.
happened to them? Do you ever see them in your...
We do. So I tried to buy Easterner at the time known as Newsboy. So when I bought Valiant and Newsboy were side by side in Newport Beach, California. And I bought Valiant, and Heritage was there too, all 3.
Yeah, I was gonna
They
say.
were racing. And so I bought Valiant, then I was trying to, once I found out that Newsboy was Easterner, then I thought, I should get that boat and give it to Ralph, because Ralph Anderson was involved, his grandfather built the boat, and he was involved as a child in the construction. So we tried, and it's being restored and being raced in Newport. Nefertiti was built by Hood, also Hood designed, built by Graves. That's still racing. I think it's in Europe. Yeah.
What's next for Valiant?
Well, I'm trying to donate the boat, and there's several reasons. Firstly, it's tax advantaged to do that, and it's either donate it to a charity that will get some value out of it and hopefully keep racing it, or ship it over to Europe and sell it to Europe, which is where most of them go. And I think that it's an American boat and kind of belongs here, but that's plan B, is ship it to Europe. So the Navy has a charity that deals with kind of wounded warrior kind of thing, but they're in Sacramento. So it's almost impossible to get the boat there. With the current keel, you have to tear everything off the deck, including the rails. And that makes it legal 8 hours a day on the road. So it would be like a $120,000 project to ship it there. So it's just not practical. Then there's another group that's a Wounded Warrior thing that's backed by a guy that wants to race the boat in the Opera House. They're the only boat to have won it 5, actually 6 times. And so it's the perfect boat for him. And if he can get organized to do that, then he'll back the charity. So the way it works, you donate it, they have to own the boat for 3 years, and then they can sell it. So you have to arrange, they're so expensive to maintain, you have to arrange somebody that will take care of it for 3 years. You want a boat?
We'll certainly miss seeing it. It's a shame, you know, that so many of these beautiful boats that we've grown up. This will be my 60th year that my parents bought a boat and sailed in Marblehead, and remember all these boats way back, and we'll miss it.
It is, I mean, it's sort of, that's why I gave this talk at the Eastern Dip, is one of the guys there said, you know, that boat's been here all of my life. It's the last big, you know, sailing boat. But it's just, this is not a good place for them. I mean, I don't mean this as a negative, but the Boston Yacht Club starts Wednesday night races in 9 feet of water.
Yeah.
We draw 9.5. So, and then they say, why don't you come out and race? And I said, you got a chart? So it's just not, there's no local racing. It's a great boat for cruising, but you need, as Andrea could tell you, you need your 12 to 13 best friends to go with you.
Yeah.
And we used to have, everyone was active. Now there's not, you know, on a given Sunday, we can rally about 8 of us.
Because we're all getting older.
Sadly, yes.
That's the same.
I didn't think that, but I'm pretty sure it's true.
It happens.
It does.
Gary, whatever happened to the rest?
So that's a sad, so my partner was a guy, Dr. Dirk
No, I
Apple.
knew Dirk and Sheila.
Yeah, and he passed away from pancreatic cancer, and so that the boat never got put back together.
I didn't
And
think
then
so.
you know, there's a progression. It goes from the front of a boatyard to the back of a boatyard to far away from the water to, you know, to the crusher. So that's.
I didn't know if he had sold it, because at one point he had a bow tow.
Yeah, no, he got another boat, but he
He had
didn't
that
sell
big
it.
bow tow out there, and I didn't know if you knew what it just.
That was such a lightly built boat, and Hinckley's enjoy a good reputation, and from where I sit, it was not a deserved reputation, but certainly not their wooden boats.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's sad though, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
You touched on Halifax races, and I think you've done more than a dozen of them over the years. Any thoughts on taking a boat that's primarily been around the buoy's boat to do something like that? Any adjustments or things you had to deal with?
Well, we've only had one race where the race up was a little scary. We've had lots of scary deliveries coming back. And so the thing about coming back is you get to decide when. So you can manage the weather. Going up, you're surrounded by other boats, a couple of cutters. It's much safer than you think. I think my advice is that planning your sleep and food is a lot harder than you think.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, just with space below and everything. I mean, you fitted it out.
So
with what you had to work with.
We built these bags. Remember that you're still using yours, right? We built the Valiant bags that were a certain size, and all the crew got them. We said, that's your stuff. That plus sea boots and foul weather gear. That's it. You can fit a toothbrush, a couple of, and we used to have, the Boston Yacht Club runs a truck up. So you can put other stuff there that you want when you get there, or you want coming back. And so we'd have to get really rigorous about, you can't bring more stuff. You know, this is the stuff you get. We need the space for life rafts, first aid kits, food, beer.
Of course.
The important stuff. So it was really, I would encourage, if you haven't, you'd think you could get a ride on a boat, but you can't, because crew management and getting people that are going to work reliably in shifts. Most people prefer to sail with people they know, so it's probably impossible to get a ride. You can volunteer to be one of the escort boats. So that's a way to do it, is to just, you know, take the ride on one of the escort boats and get to know the people. It's really a fun race.
It's a blast.
And it's, you know, it's their signature event. They're awfully glad to see the boats from Marblehead. And I found that for me, I like racing, but it's what, 8 hours max? You know, it's more fun to go somewhere to get ready for the race. So I really enjoy the deliveries. And usually if you want to get a ride on one of those boats, the thing to do is to contact the owner and say what deliveries are you having trouble getting crew for, and volunteer for the deliveries. Because there's less stress, you get to know the boat, they get to know you, and then once you've established reliability, then you get on that kind of backup crew position and you can kind of move your way on the boat. So that's the way, for us kids, when back in the 60s, when your kids were doing it and I was doing it, you just walk down on the dock, and if you were waterproof, people would grab you and throw you on the boat because they were always looking for people. And that's because the boats were bigger and heavier. Lighter boats take fewer people and are more sensitive to weight, so you don't want to waste that weight on somebody that's not going to help you in. Which is another kind of a shame, sort of the spiral of yachting as a family thing. It's gone as a family thing, and that means that it's, as sports go, it's stupidly expensive. And I have to say pickleball is probably as much fun.
Questions?
Any other questions? Well, thank you for the
join me in
opportunity.
thanking Gary.
We did.